Morning, everyone. Welcome to this HPMA webinar, which is showcasing the entrance to the HPMA award with regards to partnership working, which the Social Partnership Forum in England is really proud to sponsor for the 13th year. My name is Danny Mortimer. I'm the Chief Exec of NHS Employers, which is the Employers Association for the NHS in England. We have a number of roles that we carry out on behalf of statutory organisations in England and on behalf of the Department of Health and Social Care. And one of those is supporting the social partnership arrangements and collective arrangements in the NHS in England. And I'm the management side co-chair, therefore, of the Social Partnership Forum, and I'm joined in that responsibility by my colleague, who's the head of Health for Unison, and the staff side chair, Sarah Gorton, and also by a Minister of State for Health in our government department. Just before I introduce the fantastic finalists for this year's HPMA award, the results of which we'll learn in September, I wanted to explain a little bit about why it is that Sarah and I are so keen that we do continue to sponsor this award. As I said, the commitment to sponsoring the award is a long-term one, but we were reminded, and I know this is true across the other nations in the UK as well, of the really important work of partnership, the really important contribution of partnership to the people who work in the NHS and for the people and communities they care for during the COVID pandemic. There were things that we were able to do in our services to care for our communities because of the quality of dialogue and relationships, both nationally and locally, between employers and trade unions. And that helped with the speed and agility of response that we saw repeatedly throughout the kind of various peaks of dealing with COVID, and continues to inform the work that our organisations are doing as we, I'm never sure what the euphemism is, live with COVID, coexist with COVID, and try and deliver the full range of services to our patients. So as I said, the pandemic reminded us of that. I think we've always understood the importance of recognising and sharing good practice in terms of partnership working, and the finalists this year are probably as strong a field of examples of really powerful partnership working that we've ever seen. So there's an opportunity to reinforce the importance of partnership working. There's an opportunity to celebrate good practice. There's an opportunity to share good practice. You know, these events, I think, probably have at their heart the ability for people who are on this webinar to steal from organisations with some considerable pride, and so that we can adapt rather than endlessly reinvent good practice in terms of the things that can make a difference to our people. And you'll see that across the examples we've got on show today from Birmingham, from Belfast, and from Hertfordshire. We also actively promote the finalists. If you go to the Social Partnership Forum website, you'll see case studies of finalists from previous years, and we also invite the winner of the award to meet with the National Social Partnership Forum, which is made up of all the kind of trade union leads in England, senior figures from across various national NHS organisations, and is chaired by the Minister of State for Health in the department as well. And again, that's a real chance to celebrate what the finalist or the successful finalist has achieved, as it were. So I'm really pleased that you've been able to join us this morning. As I've said, we've got 3 organisations sharing their work with you. You've got an ability to post questions in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on that. We've got 3 organisations to get through, and we'll deal with as many questions as we can as we go. And I'm really delighted to introduce our first speakers from Birmingham and Women Children's Hospital. I was born at the Women's Hospital in Birmingham, so I played no role in the judging, so there's no bias in that, but it's great to see you here, and I'm delighted to welcome Janet Valentine, who's a Royal College of Midwives representative and practicing midwife in Birmingham, and Surinder Kaur, who's the Deputy Chief People Officer. Janet and Surinder, you're really welcome. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. My colleague Janet's going to start off.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Janet, and I work at Birmingham Women's, and I'm going to talk you through Employee with a Heart. It's a policy which we devised jointly with the management side to look at the taboo around pregnancy, miscarriage. So yeah, I'm going to go straight into that now. So with management, we developed and launched the first ever paid leave to offer miscarriage, abortion and ectopic pregnancy, because we acutely became aware that we needed to look after our own staff, who were then in turn looking after women. We adopted the Smallest Things Charter, which gave additional paid leave for parents of preterm babies. Miscarriage is often, seen, and it still is a taboo. And, a lot of people who actually lose their pregnancy, their child, won't talk about it, so they suffer in silence. And what we wanted to do was to encourage that conversation so we could actively look at how we could make it better for them to work. So with management side, we used each other's expertise and knowledge in shaping the policy. We launched it from scratch in only 6 weeks. It has actually strengthened our working relationship with management side. Because it actually shone a light on an issue which we really, really don't talk about. So having the difficult conversation with anybody who actually loses a baby, or a baby is born premature, is quite difficult. And so we wanted this policy to be adopted so it would help the NHS as a whole.
Thank you, Janet. Why have we why have we put this together? So the first thing we have to answer ourselves is the workforce case on this. So the data tells us we've got 1 in 4 pregnancies in the UK that end in loss. It's a staggering figure. Each year in the UK, there are 1 million plus pregnancies. And 60% of the professional women leave their employer in the year following their return from maternity leave. And we know the average cost of replacing an employee is staggering. And a common reason cited by employers, and this is from a Tommy's research that was carried out in 2021, that it's employers' lack of support, understanding, no sympathy shown, or understanding the actual experience. Often people are suffering in pregnancy loss in silence, and miscarriage is rarely detailed on ESR. So just sort of touching that point on ESR, I looked at the data. Our policy has been in place for about a year. And when I looked at the data, there were 15 staff recorded under sickness absence, under miscarriage element. Now, ESR doesn't have a separate element to record miscarriage. So that's one of our learning points that we need to work with the national team in terms of how it's recorded. And there's 15 staff on there. So given the data, there's 1 in 4 pregnancies in the UK. We know that figures, there's going to be more staff out there who have sadly suffered a miscarriage. And for us, it's now making sure those 15 staff who have got sickness recorded as miscarriage on the system, that we make sure that is corrected, that actually they do get paid leave now in terms, and it's not classed as sickness. Maternity rights don't start until 24 weeks. People are supporting patients with grief whilst keeping their own hidden. And pregnancy loss, there's so much evidence out there in terms of long-term mental health issues, absence and PTSD. And our potential candidates, we know in the NHS, we've got workforce availability, workforce attraction. All of these are such important things for us in the NHS, is our potential candidates, often of a childbearing age, who want to work for an employer with a heart, who is supportive of pregnancy and parenting. And there is a link on that slide that you can listen to one of our colleagues who talks about her story. And we can just talk through our policy. So what did we do in terms of our actual policy? So we've changed our policy now. We offer 10 days paid leave for the mom who's lost her baby through miscarriage, abortion, ectopic pregnancy, or through medical termination. We also offer 5 days paid leave for dad or partner, and up to 5 days leave per year for colleagues undergoing fertility treatment also. We are one of the leading fertility centres of the UK. And as Janet said, we've signed the Smallest Things Charter, and what that, by signing that, is about actually giving additional paid leave to parents of premature babies. And we've also signed the Miscarriage Association pleb, and that talks about some of the 6 areas for employers around having a policy in place, being supportive, having a supportive environment, having rules around pregnancy leave, empathy and understanding of loss of a baby, being responsive and being flexible, and also working with partners. So those are some, the key organisations. By signing them, you're signing to say that we will implement and embed those sort of core areas to support our workforce. And these changes in terms and conditions for our staff are available to all our colleagues, regardless of their length of service. And as Janet has said, in terms of working in partnership, our staff side have been absolutely critical and integral to pulling this policy together, and offered some really, really helpful views and points to really make sure that the policy was fit for purpose and really would be supporting our workforce. So we've also included in there around time off for partners to attend antenatal appointments. We've made sure the language working in partnership, that the gender neutral and inclusive language throughout. And also making sure that, our policies normally say maternity, paternity, adoption. Is basic making sure we've changed it to also include pregnancy. And if I can just say, Janet and I haven't sneaked these photos on this slide of ourselves. That's our wonderful Chief People Officer, Rafaela Goodby, who's sneaked these on before we knew about it. So when this was first launched, we had over 7 million hits on the launch, and our chief executive, Sarah Jane, 2 million sort of impressions in terms of Sarah Jane's tweet, and it was picked up by many major and local outlets. And since then, it's been adopted by a number of trusts, the police, universities, totaling over 120,000 staff that we know of, and I'm sure the figure has increased since these slides were sort of pulled together. And we're able to communicate at a very sort of time in the media around the abortion when the Roe versus Wade was overturned. And throughout all of this, that we couldn't have done this without the support of our staff side colleagues, and particularly Janet, because obviously with her clinical background as well, she was able to really bring a lot of integral points in sort of shaping that policy. And I think the next few slides, you can, I believe these slides will probably be shared. So the next sort of 4 slides are just some really, really messages, some very saddening when you hear actually some of the things that people have sort of responded. I think one of them said, I had a miscarriage and within 24 hours I was back working, and some saying, this is exactly what we need. There's absolutely, it's heartwarming and also very sad when you read some of the messages on here. So there's very much, it's very much needed policy is what I would say on these. And then I think I'm going to, if we just go on to the last slide, is what's next for us, and I'll hand it over to Janet.
So for what next, we looked at training and support for the line managers in supporting colleagues with pregnancy loss and parenting. So we didn't just want to write the policy and then expect everybody to just get on board and know what they would needed to do. We needed to approach it in a sensitive manner, because we know that because it is such a taboo subject, because women don't often talk about pregnancies and periods. So we wanted to, ensure that training was there. So those conversations were done in a very sensitive, reassuring and a caring fashion. We signed, as Serinda's already said, we signed the miscarriage abortion pledge. We also are supporting the Smallest Things to get the neonatal leave now into law. Communicating, the offer to potential and existing colleagues. So, we will do that freely. Our ambition is to get every NHS to adapt this policy because we think it's a good policy and we think that staff would benefit. And then the other thing was staff side, working through our own unions. So me personally, because I sit on the RCM board, I've actually taken that to region, and we're going to run that through all of our networks to actually get that out there to different trusts across the country, including Scotland, so that, it's there if people want it. So we want to hopefully get that to be adapted nationally as a best practice, coaching public and private sector organisations across the UA to adapt this policy, and we're willing to share the policy in full. You just need to email, Raphaela@nhs.net, and we're more than happy and willing to coach you through it, to give any advice that you would like or you feel that you need. And that's our last slide.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you, Surinder. We'll just get the AV sorted out. Thank you. Just to remind people who are on the webinar that you're able to post questions and points in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on those. I wanted to pick up that. Well, firstly, wanted to congratulate you on behalf of everyone for the work that you've done. For those of us who've had family members, partners go through miscarriage or baby loss, the kind of cultural change that you're making in your organisation and more broadly is really important and long overdue. So thank you. Well done for that. And I wanted to pick up that point about cultural change. So perhaps leading off with you, Janet. One of the first thing you flagged in terms of next steps was training for line managers. And I'd be really interested to learn a little bit more about that and what it is you as trade unions are expecting to get from that, and what managers need to get from that. And then also I'll come to you as well, Surinder.
Okay, so traditionally, before we had this policy, before we did our change, people would get sort of like 3 days off leave. And so often, they would come back to me as a trade union and say, oh, I've just had these 3 days, I'm really struggling, I'm not coping. So it's about having that conversation with tact, because obviously sometimes it's difficult for the manager. So they look at the policy, they're looking at, I'm X amount of members of staff down. How can I get the two to marry? Whereas in the long term, by having that conversation, you will get that individual back to work sooner. They will obviously, be able to then care for people who have had their loss. So they will empathise with them more. So all in all, it was a win-win.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, so there's still that need to kind of help managers have that tactful conversation to think. I think
so, because those conversations are difficult. They're difficult for the individual to say, actually, I've lost my baby, or I'm bleeding right now, and I need to go home, or I need that time. Yeah. Because everybody has got their own pressure. So I don't think it's the fact that the managers wouldn't have the conversation. It's actually sometimes having the time to have that conversation, and for that conversation to be meaningful rather than rushed.
Really helpful, Janet. Surinder, from your point of view, that point about educating managers?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical, Danny and colleagues, that, I always think it's very easy to write a policy, but the implementation, the execution of it is absolutely critical. So what we did is that we needed some help in terms of that language and how it's done. So we worked with Tommy's, and basically they had a suite of support of information on that we could utilise and tap into, in terms that we could then share that with our managers, and not just managers, our HR colleagues as well, because these are very sensitive and difficult issues. So that's what we've done, and it's a year since the policy is in place, and we are reviewing it. We're looking at the implementation, what's worked, what hasn't worked.
Yeah, and that was going to be the follow-up question, but perhaps the final question before we come to our colleagues in Belfast, which is just what are those reflections from the first year? You drawn at that point about making the policy come to life and educating managers. But are there other things that you think you'll need to improve in the policy or need to improve in the approach? Maybe start with Surinder and then I'll come to you, Janet.
I think I have been reflecting on some of our other sort of initiatives and what we offer to our workforce in terms of supporting parents. And I have been reflecting, actually, is there a detriment to anything else? Could another member of staff say, well, actually, I have this, but my terms and conditions are less favourable? So I'm just sort of looking at that to make sure that we've not disadvantaged anybody else by focusing on a particular area and not another. That's one. And I think I briefly mentioned about ESR. So one of the learnings has been actually the need to work with the national team to make sure that, you know, we can monitor and people are not recording it as sickness because it's not sickness absence. So I think those are a couple. I mean, there's other things, but obviously I'm mindful of time as well, Dan.
Yeah, no, and that's really helpful. Thank you, Surinder. Janet, from your point of view and the point of view of your staff side colleagues?
So for me, on reflection, when I look at the policy, I feel that we do need to look at what is offered to sort of like partners. And I know that we are actually bound nationally by that, but that I think would definitely be worth a conversation, because depending on their length of service, they only get sort of like 10 days. And if they haven't been in the trust, well, been in the NHS for a length of time, then they have to take it as unpaid leave. So for me, that's a loophole.
Okay, but more to do. But again, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, it's a really important area. All the areas we're talking about today actually are some of those kind of things that we've probably failed to address for too long, and you've taken real leadership in Birmingham on that. But a real sense of how that dialogue between the employer and staff side improved the document, improved the policy, improved its implementation, but also a real sense of how that dialogue is continuing, and how you're returning to document and you're trying to apply lessons in other things that you're doing. So really powerful examples of partnership. Thank you so much, and good luck in terms of what comes next in terms of the awards process. So thank you. A virtual round of applause for Surinder and Janet, and particularly thank you to Janet for taking time out of her clinical day to come and speak with us. I'm really delighted now to welcome colleagues from Northern Ireland, from the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, who've also done work on a really difficult and challenging area together. I'm delighted to introduce and welcome Margaret McKee, who's a Unison officer, Ray Rafferty, who's a Unison officer and also the staff side chair in Belfast, Orla Barron, who is a service manager for equality and planning, and Samantha Wan, who's an assistant service manager, all of whom work in Belfast. Guys, thank you so much for making the time to share your work with us, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much, and just really struck about some of the parallels with the previous presentation in terms of it has to be more than a policy. It's about reducing stigma, and it's about recognising that we are human beings, not human doings, and what happens to us in our personal life is certainly going to affect how we behave and work, and it's important that we see the person as a whole and treat them holistically. We're delighted to be here today to talk about the domestic and sexual abuse support service for staff. Again, much more than a policy sitting on a shelf, but something that we have put into practice in Belfast Trust since 2008. I suppose it's important to look at the prevalence of domestic abuse in Northern Ireland. Similar to the rest of the UK, it is increasingly on the up. I know that this slide says 13 women have been murdered since the start of the pandemic. Regrettably, that has gone up to 15 since this slide was actually produced. And we know that for 1 in 7 children, danger at home is a reality. 1 in 4 women, similar to 1 in 4 pregnancies, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. And we know from our colleagues in Women's Aid that during the last financial year, 10 babies were born in and 293 pregnant women were availing of refuge facilities within Northern Ireland. And that's very much the case because domestic abuse tends to regrettably increase during pregnancy. We know that 130 women were trafficked. They're the 130 that we actually know of. 33,000 calls to Police Service of Northern Ireland. That's an increase of 2,000 calls, which equates to a call every 17 minutes. And domestic and sexual abuse accounts for 20%. That's 1/5 of overall crime in Northern Ireland. A new advocacy service has been set up to assist people who are experiencing domestic abuse, and there's been referrals for 9,000 adults and 750 children in the last 6 months alone. We know also, in terms of statistics, that somebody will be abused 33 to 35 times before they'll actually seek help. And there's a line just down below there that you probably can't see, and it's the fact that this happens to regular people. It's not something that is going to be a certain person who's going to experience this. It's not somebody from a certain social standing or rank within the organisation. This can and does happen to anybody. So as I was saying, we can't leave domestic abuse or somebody who's experiencing domestic abuse, we can't expect them to shirk it off at the front door and arrive into the workplace and be fully present and fully achieving their full potential in the workplace. We also know that when the perpetrator tends to lose control, that they will start, if the person's in the workplace, they will start to exert control in the workplace. And we see that 1/3 of all incidents actually happen in the workplace. We also, our staff, as we know in the NHS, are our most valuable resource, and we have a duty of care. They also have a fundamental right, human right to live free from abuse. From a corporate social responsibility point of view, from a health and safety and well-being point of view, we need to protect our staff and we need to ensure that they are safe. We cannot expect them to achieve their full potential when they're experiencing domestic abuse and not getting any support or solace within the workplace. There are proven links to absence, concentration and performance, and the aspect of presenteeism. When somebody turns up to the workplace and is often afraid to take annual leave because it means going back to the place of abuse, they may be present in the workplace, but they may not be performing to their full potential. We also know that in terms of somebody trying to survive and flee domestic abuse, that economic stability is important. So having somebody's finances protected will help them to leave an abusive relationship. Regrettably, if undetected, domestic abuse can lead to issues with concentration, performance, absenteeism, which can, unnoticed, can end up in disciplinary proceedings, and that's something that we do not want to happen. Within Belfast Trust, we're the largest trust in the UK with 22,000 staff, and 84% of those are female. So it is something that affects an awful lot of our staff. And we also know that having this policy and support service, it's a good investment to retain skilled and experienced staff. And we see over and over again, staff who have availed of the service are very, very loyal and very keen to stay within Belfast Trust. So in terms of our journey, we became a trust in 2008 and we implemented a policy. As I said, it's much more than a policy. We have trained support officers. We work in partnership with Margaret and Ray and other trade union colleagues. And we have support officers who are trained volunteers. They receive training from Women's Aid, from Men's Advisory Project, from the Rainbow Project, from PSNI. And we work exclusively with different partners across the community to ensure that we are able to signpost our staff into the expert services within the community. It's a mixture of both practical and emotional support. I suppose one of the most important things that we would tell our support officers is that they are not there to rescue the person. They are there to try and support them, give them practical support in the workplace and give them emotional support, but not to advise them, not to tell them to leave, not to try and take them out of their abusive relationship. It is up to that person, and it's about empowering them with the information that they need. So there are some of the partnerships. We are co-chairs within Belfast Trust of the Belfast Area Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse Partnership, and that's really important in terms of forging our links with the police service, with Women's Aid, with the whole range of people there. I suppose, again, one of the things that I would say about our support service is that you'll see the logo there behind Margaret and Samantha's head. It's the I, and the publicity is really important, that it's gender neutral, that it's not something that only pertains to females. It's not something that happens just in straight relationships or at a certain age or at a certain rank within the organisation. So our marketing is very, very important in terms of that this is a support service for everybody. So our support officers also have links and have contact with clinical psychology, which means that they are experienced in active listening and listening without judgment. And they are taught very much not to fix or rescue the person, even though that is within probably everybody's basic instinct is to want to do that. And it is about availing the support services. We recognise that the expertise is there in those external agencies, so it's about us signposting to those people. In terms of some of the practical support that we offer, certainly during the pandemic, we found that there was an awful lot of domestic abuse and heightened cases in terms of severity. And we've had to have safety measures with our security officers, with PSNI, in terms of getting safety alarms, in terms of changing a person's place of work, in terms of changing their hours. Also, a real lifeline is a salary advance, which means that the person can have their salary paid to them into a separate account that the perpetrator may not have access to. And this is a real lifeline in terms of actually getting a non-molestation order or seeking to pay a deposit on a new property without the perpetrator's knowledge. Recently, we have also added into our policy 10 days special paid leave, and that's really key, because we know on average somebody will have to go to about 19 different organisations to actually secure their future of that and their children, to try and make a move from an abusive relationship. We also offer redeployment across Belfast Trust and across the rest of Northern Ireland. I suppose one of the lessons that we have learned is that it may not only be life changing for the person, but indeed it could be life saving. And I'm happy to hand over to Samantha here and happy to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, and just following on from Orla's, lots of our support officers will be trained in this particular issue. There is a wide-ranging belief, why doesn't the individual leave? And managers may ask that in terms of staff members who've had frequent instances whereby they've confided that they've possibly experienced domestic violence, or they've explained about their situation and it's not a new occurrence. So this is something that's very important that we share this message. It's not always very easy to leave. In fact, it's rarely easy to leave. And actually most people who experience domestic violence or sexual abuse in the home or in their relationship are most at risk after they separate, and statistics have shown us that, sadly, in terms of some of the cases. And you may not be able to leave if you have children or other dependents, concerned about going to court and all of the legalities, if there's shared home ownership or properties. That can all be very overwhelming and intimidating and frightening for individual staff. And the actual finances, in terms of finances that are tied up very closely, shared homes, shared possessions, and when there's family involved. Housing is clearly the biggest issue. Individuals are likely to become homeless should they leave an abusive relationship, and all of that will impact on an ability to come to work and to attend work and to concentrate on work. And the support network around you may actually fall away if you leave a relationship, and that lots of individuals have shared that with us. And then concerns about interventions, maybe about getting social services involved or other family members. And those might all be factors in keeping someone in an abusive relationship. So it's not just as simple or straightforward as leave. Immigration status, and we've encountered that. A number of our staff who have been recruited from outside of the UK, and they have been threatened by their partner or their family, that home office intervention might be involved, and that's been a very real threat for a number of recent cases that we've been involved in. And potentially that fear or that risk of not being able to access legal support, for example, or housing support because of their visa status within the home office regulations. And then pets. It's almost impossible, very difficult to get pets looked after, and that might be one of the key things keeping an individual in an abusive relationship, and that might be used as a pawn to keep them there. Is the experience the same for everyone? And no, it's not. No case, whilst there will be similarities, but no two cases are identical. And honour-based violence, which impacts a large proportion of our community, and we are an increasingly diverse workforce, and female genital mutilation and the shame that honour-based abuse brings on a family in terms of that added layer of cultural, religious references and shame that will keep individuals in abusive relationships, and add another layer of difficulty in discussing or talking about outside of the home. And the police may struggle to recognise abusive relationships if it's same-sex couples, and that can be particularly difficult for individuals as an added layer of challenge to talk about and to share. And in one of our case studies in our virtual resource, we actually reflect, it was an individual from, as a gay male sharing his experience, and he was threatened with being outed by his abusive partner. And individuals with a disability are much more likely to suffer physical abuse from an intimate partner. So that added layer of difficulty and an extra challenge and fear factor as well. And persons with mental health problems are at an increase of experience violence, regardless of their marital background or their gender background. COVID was known as the shadow pandemic, and sadly, staying at home, that message did not necessarily mean being safe at home. And that was brought out at our recent Women's Aid conference that we had the pleasure of being invited to. And the pandemic really added an additional factor for so many individuals experiencing abuse. Our service is aimed at being diverse, representative and inclusive, so that it does cover everybody within our workforce, not just certain females of certain bands. It's a diverse, inclusive space. And we hope that our virtual resources reflect that in terms of the case studies of individuals who have been supported. We are gender inclusive of race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, culture, and that list is not exhaustive. We're a values-based organisation, and we believe our service and supporting staff is as well. We most recently, within our ethnic minority staff network, developed a podcast in partnership with Southall Sisters and the Jewish Women's Aid in terms of adding that cultural, religious, race reference, that additional layer, and how it impacts individuals who are trapped in difficult relationships, abusive relationships, and the difficulty of discussing that in the workplace or outside of the home. And our cultural competence is reflected in the training that is provided for our support officers. Some legal updates, and these are for Northern Ireland in terms of the legislation surrounding domestic violence and abuse. I'm not going to go into that except to say that in response, Belfast Trust offers 10 days paid leave. And that, as Orla said, can be that lifeline to individuals getting that additional time off, who maybe have had to exhaust annual leave at short notice for other domestic related matters, and that they can talk in confidence to their union rep, to HR, or to their line manager or colleagues. So in terms of how we grow, not standing still, that's very important. Our service has been in place for a number of years. Sharing the success for us is key, and sharing it within Northern Ireland and the health and social care system within Northern Ireland, other trusts in the region. We, Orla and I, have presented at a number of events, sharing our policy, giving our documents all available in Word format so they can be adapted and used. And we're very proud in terms of our work with NHS employers. I'm the Belfast rep on the health and wellbeing group, and the Belfast Trust policy was used as the NHS model policy. And that's something we're very proud of. We did that in partnership with lots of national trade unions as well. We continue to raise awareness. Don't stop talking about this. And we display all of our corporate communication, for example, our calendars highlight the abuse service, and routinely throughout the year we republish. Our trade union colleagues are clearly our biggest advocate, and they share it widely at national conference and regional meetings. Training and peer support. So our support workers are volunteers. They are trained. Women's Aid, PSNI, and our other partnership organisations, and the Men's Advisory Project and Rainbow all support in the training. And then peers discuss cases anonymously, because some of our cases are very challenging, very emotionally involving, and Orla and I never cease to be surprised and saddened by some of the experiences our staff have coming to work. Our trauma-informed practice, we are a trauma-informed organisation, and we translate that to supporting our support workers and our staff who use the service. And as Orla said, the impact on children, we can't underestimate that. And this is why this is a work-based issue. We believe it's an employment matter, and that supporting our staff includes supporting their families. Because if you come to work, that holistic part of you, knowing that everyone is supported, that it isn't involved in the trust, that gives our staff some relief, and knowing that we have their back. And as Orla stated, the increase during COVID was reflected in the increase in our service and the number of calls our support workers received. Our digital toolkit, we're very proud of this. We don't have time to go through it today, but we can share this link. It's a page tagger resource, and it covers everything for anyone who's curious what domestic and sexual violence is, any manager who wants to support a colleague, any staff member who thinks a colleague or friend or even someone outside of our employment may be experiencing violence. And it's really that supportive, encompassing and signposting to all of the statutory bodies and organisations and best practice from right across the world is contained. And if you are experiencing domestic violence, you can quickly find out how to get support in work if you wish, or externally. And then quickly, I'll just show you up in the very top left-hand corner, you see exit site. If someone is viewing the page tagger and someone comes in, maybe they're viewing it and they don't want a colleague or a family member or the abuser to see, they can quickly exit the site safely and there's no trace. So this is, I'm almost at the end. Promoting and sharing our success. We have corporate endorsement. Our senior executive team, Orla and I presented at Ray Rafferty, our trade union colleagues' invitation to the Health and Safety Committee and to our executive team. And it was really quite touching. Our executive team were obviously moved by some of the stories and the case studies that we were anonymously sharing in terms of how staff are impacted and affected by this. It doesn't just affect female colleagues, it's right across the entire spectrum. And some misperceptions and misbeliefs and myths that people hold in terms of who's affected by domestic violence and sexual abuse were quickly dispersed. So we do have that support from on top. And down the bottom right-hand corner, that's our corporate calendar, and every year it changes in terms of the colours. But our corporate calendar for Belfast Trust, the single one that exists, highlights the domestic violence and abuse support service. We have a Christmas appeal with the Men's Advisory Project and Women's Aid each year, and our staff never cease to amaze with their generosity in terms of financial gifts and also physical gifts for anyone who has to spend the Christmas period either in a refuge or in supported housing. We have awareness sessions for managers, new managers induction, staff, new staff onboarding, all contains information about our service, so it's constantly promoted. We also have our Be Well, our health and wellbeing resources, and this is contained front and centre there. And that is the link below to our support toolkit, our new virtual resource. Next steps, continue to promote our toolkit. We only launched it in March of this year, and it's something that we continue to promote. Our occupational health colleagues at present, this is now being built into routine inquiry. Anyone who is attending occupational health, in terms of some of the routine questions that might be posed to them, will include from here on if anyone is experiencing any form of violence, abuse, coercion in their relationships or within their family circle or outside of work. And if so, how to signpost those individuals to our range of support. And continuing to explore the range of staff involvement in fundraising. Our staff want to support this. It's something that Belfast Trust is very committed to, and continuing to raise awareness. And Ray, Margaret and I were having a conversation just before we came on air. Continuing to raise awareness is the key thing. So many individuals might not be aware of the service or might not be aware of the full extent of the support we have available, such as salary advance, time off, and liaising with management about shifts. Those are very practical supports, as well as the listening. And then that's us. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Orla, Samantha. We're not going to have lots of time for questions, but perhaps I could just come to Margaret and Ray, just to ask for your perspective as staff side colleagues in terms of, I mean, this is because as has been emphasised to us, and I think again we all understand, hugely sensitive set of circumstances, but a really impressive attempt to both remove stigma but also educate the workforce about some of the kind of stereotypes we might carry about domestic and sexual abuse and violence and who it does affect. But from your point of view as staff side leaders, what's the role you've been able to play, and how do you think the work is going so far?
Well, I'm the branch secretary in one of the hospitals within the Belfast Trust, within the Royal Victoria Hospital. But a number of years ago, my first became, involved in this due to representing a young woman who was a victim of domestic abuse, but she was up in front of a disciplinary panel.
Okay.
And had never mentioned this to anyone before within the workplace or manager. So she actually shared it with me as I was going over to represent her. And I asked her for permission to speak to the panel about this. And I actually spoke to the panel before I brought the girl in, and couldn't get over how understanding our HR people were about it. And really, it ended up not being a disciplinary, to bringing the girl in, changing her work pattern to try and help her because she was looking after young children with 2 jobs. I don't want to get on too long about it, but this is what started this journey for me. It was like how many other victims of domestic violence are out there in this workplace and want to come into work because they feel safer than what they do at home. And I have to say that it was the most easiest partnership or part of a partnership I've ever been involved in is with our HR colleagues, because at no time was there any barrier put up. We all wanted to do the same thing to make sure that our staff, our members, felt safe within the workplace, and how could we help them in any other ways. And the policy, and I'm really proud to say that I think we were the first trust to have a domestic abuse policy. And that policy has been adopted by my union, Unison, across the water in England. But we just didn't want a policy to be sitting there in a drawer. The domestic abuse support workers were the obvious next step, to have people there that would make that policy work. And also recognising that probably as the trade union, as a rep, that people, members or employers, employees, whatever you want to call them, would come and speak to us maybe and feel a bit more that it would be held more confidential, or not that their managers wouldn't understand. So to me, the secret of our success is having the domestic abuse support workers in place, and also keep having it on our hub, on our website, and have like what we have behind us, notices, leaflets put out. This is all that we've put in place, and I believe that we need. And if there's anything else, or anybody out there can tell us anything else we can do to even make it better, we're quite open to hear.
Fantastic. Thanks, Margaret, but both in terms of the kind of experience and that case you've had, but also giving a sense of how the partnership has helped deliver the policy. Final words, Ray, quickly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, this started off as a conversation some 16 years ago about common issues that both the employer and the trade unions were facing in relation to representing and safeguarding staff. Once we identified that there was an underlying issue around domestic violence, this was grown out of all proportion as far as we could have seen then. We've learned a lot. Most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, it's a demonstration that working collectively between 13 trade unions, primarily led by Unison, but supported by each of the trade unions, together with the Belfast Trust, we have impacted in a positive way so many lives over the years. We've protected people, and I would say this project has actually saved lives. It's also demonstrated that we can work with partnerships within the community, whether it be the police, women's aid, etc. And it's broken down barriers, and it's something which our society needed. So it's had a societal change. That's dynamic.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you to all four of you. Really, really appreciate you sharing that and being so candid about the work that you've done. And good luck between now and September. Just our final session then, I'm really pleased to introduce our colleagues from Hertfordshire Partnership again, another really pressing societal issue that we see a fantastic example of partnership working in. Delighted to introduce Louise Thomas, who's the Deputy Director of People and OD, Andrew Ferguson, who's the Chair of Staff Side, and Maria Gregorio, who's the Associate Director of People. Louise, are you leading us off?
Hi Danny, yes I am. Thank you for the introduction. And I have to give apologies on behalf of our colleague Andy today, who's not very well unfortunately, yeah. So apologies from Andy. We're here to talk to you about our work on equality in partnership. So our work started off because just a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago now, we noticed a particular issue within the trust. So we know that just over a third of our people within the trust are BAME staff, and we, as all other trusts do, compile our res data each year. And we could see that our BAME staff were more than twice as likely. It was 2.11 times more likely to enter the formal disciplinary process than their white colleagues. We knew that this was not something that we wanted to accept, and you can see behind me on my background our trust values, and our trust values are about being welcoming, kind, respectful, positive and professional, and any form of discrimination is absolutely outside of our trust values, and is not where we wanted to be as a trust. Our trade unions were talking to us about this as well, and our BAME staff network were talking to us about this, and I'll come on to you in a moment about the impact that it had on people. We were also at the same time as seeing this high rate of BAME staff entering our formal disciplinary processes. We were seeing quite a high number of suspensions and a high number of formal cases. So we were seeing over 40, I think the peak was around about 44 cases, formal cases in a month, and a significant number of suspensions that we were seeing. In addition to that, cases were on average 6 months long. Some cases had gone on for 2 years. So there were some real significant issues. In addition to that, we weren't routinely reporting about this. So people weren't really cited on how long cases were taking, how many cases there are, how many suspensions there are. There was a slight lack of transparency and openness around what the issue looked like. And as I said, it had a real impact on people, and our BAME staff network were telling us that the biggest single issue for them was around trust and confidence in the trust senior leadership team, in terms of caring, understanding that the issues that our BAME staff were facing, and B, having confidence that we would actually do something to tackle it. And this was also having an impact on so many individuals who were going through lengthy processes, that could be career limiting, that had a really significant impact on their well-being, and on our service users as well, because obviously we were pulling people out of services and putting them onto suspension, for example, subjecting people to a really lengthy period of really highly traumatic and stressful time for people, so they weren't capable of performing at their best for our service users as well. So this is having a negative impact all around. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Maria just now, who was instrumental in setting up a lot of the actions that were taken.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, everyone. So some of our main actions began really with setting up the panel and introducing the strategy. So initially it did begin with a policy, making sure that our policy was reflective of some of the actions that we wanted to see take place. And initially, that was actually the decision-making panel, and actually bringing that policy to life was really important. So we embarked on asking some of our colleagues from the People and OT team, who predominantly had a view on employee relations cases and knew some of those cases in detail, members of our BAME staff network and our operational management team at managing director level, to be part of our decision-making panel. And the key role of that decision-making panel was to screen the fact-find investigations that took place when an incident first took place. Initially, just to gather the key facts, not embark on a full-blown investigation, but just some of the key facts to enable the panel to have a look at some of the main issues and whether there was enough factual information there to proceed to a formal investigation for that to be commissioned formally through a disciplinary policy. So the key role of the decision-making panel was specifically to look at the equality and diversity issues that came about through that fact find, and to apply some consistency and approach in terms of some of those decisions that were made across the trust, and definitely whether those fact finds should go forth to formal investigation. So no formal cases or suspensions are actually instigated before a decision-making panel is to have a look at those key facts first, and some of the formal sharing of our res data and KPIs and case numbers and links of suspensions. We share those in order to make sure that there's consistency in approach. Thanks, Louise. So in order to make sure that we could get this all moving and set up in the way that we wanted it to be launched across the trust, and for it to have the really positive impact that we were really hopeful it would eventually have, we set up a task and finish group of all of our key stakeholders. And initially they were voluntary, so people who wanted to have a hand and who were keen to see the same changes that we did. And we co-produced all of the documentation, the guidance documents, some of the procedures, the protocols, and amending the disciplinary policy. We do all of that work in partnership, and we consistently review the disciplinary policy and some of our guidance documents. Because things change, we take learning from some of the cases that go forth to formal disciplinary processes, and therefore we make amendments to our policy. The initial policy that we set up had a second decision-making panel. The role of that panel was initially to decide whether formal investigations should go forth to a panel hearing. We've since removed that stage because it actually had a negative impact by creating far more business in terms of queues and elongating the process than we had originally envisaged. So we removed that, and we're left with what we call the decision-making panel. So what we do then is, in terms of reviewing our policy, is that they're co-produced. They go off to our operational partnership group for discussion, and on to our JCNC for formal ratification and comments from our executive team. We work really closely with our staff side reps and our staff side chair and secretary. We know each case in the detail together, and if there are any issues that come up in any of those investigations, either in the fact find or thereafter, we meet on a weekly basis to have those discussions. I'm alerted to any issues that arise, and together we look into those, and with the aim of resolving them before they become anything far bigger, or where processes become elongated, or where staff are treated unfairly. in order to make sure that our staff are supported properly. So our monthly reporting goes forth to KPIs. I think the transparency in that monthly reporting on our KPIs has had a really positive impact. It's enabled us to share the work that we do, for people to look in on what we're doing, to provide us with comments, with some positive criticism, to enable us to make any other changes that we see fit, and to take forward a lot of the learning. Some of that learning takes place via meetings with everybody who's had a hand in bringing a case to a panel, and also those who have undertaken the fact finds as well as the investigations. And together we make changes either in the systems that we have around, either on the wards or in some of our service units, or in processes, in order to continue to have the positive impact that the process has seen to date. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Maria. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact that this work has had. So within a relatively short space of time, so within a period of a couple of years, we have now achieved a real difference in terms of the number of BAME staff who are entering the formal disciplinary process. So we've gone from having more than people being more than twice as likely to enter the process to less likely than white colleagues to enter the process, and this being considered as equality in terms of that equality of experience and treatment, which is really important to us. Case length that we were experiencing from over 6 months on average, and those really long cases of kind of 24 months, 18 months and so on, has reduced to on average less than 3 months. I believe right now it's an average of 2 months at the moment, but it's been consistently under 3 months. Our number of suspensions has dramatically reduced, and our suspensions are very much only where it's absolutely necessary to suspend, and more often than not that's because the police are involved or something along those lines. So it really is kept to the absolute necessity cases. The number of formal cases is also dramatically reduced. So we see far fewer cases going through to formal panel, and then with no case to answer, or with any significant concerns about the process, etc. The number of cases reduced from over 40 at its height of about 44 to around about 7. So we've achieved that equality, but also it's had a real impact because our BAME staff network have been so very closely involved throughout. They have been able to work with us, see with us, and monitor with us the experience of staff and reflect that back to the BAME staff network attendees and members. So it's also had a knock-on impact in terms of the feeling of trust and confidence from our BAME staff network, that actually they feel as if they've been heard over this issue. They feel that we've taken some decisive action, and it gives confidence that we are willing to work in partnership in relation to a whole other variety of issues that BAME colleagues are facing. In addition, in relation to our relationships with between staff sides and management sides, that really significantly improved. It's really increased the level of confidence in that relationship and the level of trust in that relationship. So we did take a few leaps of faith together, and really openly publishing our data and our information, and sharing the problem with staff side colleagues. And staff side colleagues have been really amazing in terms of sharing and feeding back to us in an informal way, rather than waiting for JCNC when the chief exec's there, so that they it's simply not that kind of relationship. It's helped us build a really strong relationship where we get things done together in partnership, we collaborate, we co-produce. and we work through issues together and raise them with each other together, which brings me on to some of the keys to our success. So that constructive working is really important, and that working together. So I would add that I can see in the attendee list that we have got members of the People and OD team on the call as well. So I wouldn't want to overlook the amount of work that the People and OD team have done, particularly the business partnering and the ER team in helping us achieve this success together. And for Andy and his staff side team, everybody has contributed in working together really strongly at all levels. Everyone's been on exactly the same page, and as Andy said the other day when we were talking about this project, and Andy's our staff side chair, he was saying, you know, that there's simply no place for adversarial relationships and adversarial trade union relationships in his view, and that view is spread across all of our staff side colleagues, and that's the mindset that we have come into this with together, all different parties, has been really important in terms of creating that constructive working, and then being able to demonstrate it. So to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, to demonstrate that principle of co-production, of fully involving people from the start, of sharing when you go, you know, when you might be going wrong, when you might have, when you've got a problem. And monitoring the measures of success formally, sharing those together, being really open about it, and the informal relationships that Maria described. That, you know, that there is rarely a day that goes past without us having those informal conversations, and it certainly never goes to a full week without those conversations, so that we can swiftly resolve things together, and we can learn constantly, keep adapting our processes together, admitting when we get things wrong, and collaborating. Really at the heart of it is around that trust, that openness, and that honesty. So thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to add to that, Maria?
I think the only thing I'd like to add is the fact that in true collaboration, there's a sharing of ideas, I think, and our staff side colleagues do share with us some really good ideas that they come across, you know, at conference or through their other union colleagues. And wholeheartedly, we consider all of those options that they bring forward. For example, policies that they've seen that they think are really, really good, and some really good ideas. And we consider those wholeheartedly and take some of those forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Maria. And do pass our best wishes to Andy for a speedy recovery as well. We haven't got very long left together, ladies and gentlemen. We'll give ourselves perhaps a little bit longer for next year's event to enable some conversation. But again, I think all three organisations today, all three partnerships, have emphasised why the SPF is so interested in sponsoring this award and in highlighting the work that you've heard described today from Hertfordshire, from Belfast, and from Birmingham. And again, it speaks to, I think, time and again, colleagues returned to the questions of long-term relationships, constructive engagement. There will always be moments of tension. I guess right now more than ever, there are real difficulties facing trade unions and employers as they're trying to do best by their members or by the people who work in their organisations. But actually, that long-term quality of relationship can lead to social justice, as you've heard from in Hertfordshire. It can lead to protecting people and saving lives, as Ray talked about in Belfast, and it can lead to a much more humane and supportive and open approach to miscarriage and baby loss, as you've heard described in Birmingham. And I think all three examples today are, as I said before, are as good as we've ever seen in these awards in the time we've been sponsoring them. I know all the organisations are open for kind of assisting others, and we'll obviously continue to spotlight their work on the Social Partnership website. Really grateful to HPMA colleagues for organising the event today, and really grateful to all our colleagues from Birmingham, from Belfast and from Hertfordshire for speaking with us today. Good luck to all three organisations in terms of the finals in September. And thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Take care now. Bye-bye.